all hot Papercraft.
Hello, welcome to the second video of this tutorial about Blender Basics for Paper Modelers. If you haven't watched the first part of this tutorial, I suggest you go back and do so. You can find the link in the description, because this video is actually building on each other. These tutorials are actually building on each other, so if you didn't understand the things from the first video, you will not be able to understand what I'm talking about here. So please go back and watch the first video if you haven't done so. Otherwise, just listen, we'll jump right in. And today, or in this video, we are going to talk about object mode. And the object mode is actually something like you have a scene, which is where you can have several objects, just like now. I have 3 objects: a camera, a cube, and a light. This is a light, this is a camera, this is the cube. And so actually, for paper models, why would you think that this kind of thing is useful for paper models? Because, you know, if I have a model, I would probably just do one animal, one plane, one house. Maybe unless I do a whole entire city. But I just have one object, right? Why is this useful? Because it can be useful to split up your model in different objects, which you of course then at the end need to unify to one with what I call a Bool tool. No, I don't call it that. It's called that. And what is called a Bool tool. And yeah, so if you have a building, maybe if you have a castle, you have different towers, different walls, you have eaves and dormers. If you have an animal, you have the main body, you have the head, you have the legs, and you have the tail, maybe. And if you have aircraft, you have the fuselage, wings, canopy, or engine nacelles. So you will have different parts, and it's actually easier to build them separately in many cases. Although it's also good, like, depending on what kind of... It's really difficult to say, but sometimes it can be better to keep things in one object. Sometimes it can be better to have separate objects. Good, but what is important is that, if you have objects, don't think about, like unifying them too early with Bool tool. It's as long as you're not exporting out, there is no reason why not to keep them as objects. So sometimes it's necessary to do them as one object. Sometimes it makes sense. Sometimes it doesn't matter. Then you can do it or not do it. But in general, I would say, when in doubt, keep the objects apart, and always keep a copy of the version of the model in the version where it has the different objects. And then when you come to export, you save it under a new name, and then you will unify the objects into one before you export. Or anyway, it makes a lot of sense for 3D, this kind of 3D stuff, to make copies of your document as you progress along the development of the model. So that later, if you save something and you do something wrong, then you can go back to a previous version. It really makes sense, believe me. It helped me a lot when I did it. Good. If you look into objects, so if you want to add any object, let me move this cube out of the way. If you want to add any objects, you can always do so through here. To add, and then you have a selection of objects. Yeah, like interesting things like force field, speakers, lights, lattices and armatures, grease pencil, volume, text, and surfaces. So and something called NURBS. NURBS is really interesting. So all of these are really cool things that you have here, but actually there are only 2 things in this whole entire list which are actually useful for paper modeling. One which is the mesh, and one which are images. And then, yeah, I haven't really found out so well about curves, so actually the first curve may be useful. Well, but, so And even among the mesh objects, there are only two which are actually useful, because one is the cube and one is the cylinder. A cone is also it can also be something that you might need, but actually you can also just have create a cone from a cylinder. Actually, for many parts, if you have round parts, you basically have cone sections. You don't have a cone which has a tip, but you have a cone which is like something between a cylinder and a cone. And actually almost anything you will do in a model will be based on some level or another on a cube, or that means a rectangular shape, or a cylinder. And yeah, so let me just add. So one thing is that you there's like in the beginning, you see in the beginning, if you open a new document, you can see here that the 3D cursor is positioned in the origin. The origin is the point which is 0, is marked as 0. So I moved this square off. So that's why this square is now in the position Y. You see it's in position 8 meters. It's 8 meters away from the origin. Its center is 8 meters away from the origin. So if I add a new object, let me add a cylinder. Then this is positioned at the location of the 3D cursor, which in this case is in the origin. But as you move along, you probably move the cursor to all kinds of places. So just remember that if you add something new, it will appear in the position of the 3D cursor. How about icosphere? Okay, so that's important to remember, so you can get the new objects from this menu. Then the first thing that you should learn is like how to move an object. So to move an object, well, first of all, you have to select an object. And yeah, make sure that you don't select the cursor, because if you select the cursor, you're just moving the cursor. Then you select the object. I already showed in the previous video how to select. And you have different kinds of ways of selecting. Just to review. So one is this tweak, which will just select the object. Another one is the select box, which will select several objects. And then you have select circle, which is not so useful in object mode, but super useful in edit mode. And then you have the select lasso, with which you can select based on some lasso. So, and then you can move things around, and you can move several objects at the same time if you have to. Yeah. So how do you do that? You select them, and once you select them, this thing appears. Another representation of the axes, and this we call a gizmo. And the gizmo, and it's actually very straightforward to use the gizmo to move things. So you move things around the red axis by clicking on the red arrow. You move things around the green axis by clicking on the green axis, and you move things around the blue axis by clicking on the blue arrow. Another way to do it is you just don't select the move tool at all. You just click on it, and then you directly hold the mouse button and move around. This will have a free moving. So if you want to constrain to the axis, like you could do with the gizmo tool, you could also hold. No, don't have Chinese input. So you can hold the button Z for the Z axis, the button Y for the Y axis, and the button X for the X axis. But depending on your graphic card and your computer, this can be a rather painful thing. So actually moving the things there's no good reason for, yeah, and you see now this has actually frozen. So there's no good reason not to use the gizmo, unless what sometimes happens that it does not work, because as we later see, it may not work. It does not work, at least in some cases it does not work with lights, and it does not work with reference images. Good. So I move around, like, and another thing that I should be aware of that you see now. So here I have what is called a pivot point. And the pivot point is the point from which you do any action. And in this case, in the case of moving the action, it doesn't really matter that much. Now this pivot point is set to the median point. The median point is actually the center of your object. Another one is the bounding box. This is like if you have an imaginary box around your object. In this case, the median point and the bounding box center are the same. Later, it may not be exactly the same. So, but you can switch this to the 3D cursor, and you notice what happens. The gizmo moves over to where the 3D cursor was located. So that's what you need to pay attention to. Like if you click on your object and you want to move it and you cannot find a gizmo, that may be because like something like this. Like you click on the object and you want to move it, but there is no gizmo. This is probably because you misplaced your 3D cursor, and this is set to the 3D cursor. You should switch to the bounding box center, and you will have your pivot point again inside of your object. Good. Then the next thing is to rotate an object, and I think the cylinder is actually quite will do well for this. So if I want to rotate an object, I get a gizmo in the same way, but here this time I have circles. So I have one circle for each axis, which means to rotate along that axis, and I have one white circle which rotates. Yeah, actually it rotates according to the view that I'm in. So, and another thing that I need to be careful is like if I click on somewhere in between this imaginary ball, then the object might rotate in two directions at the same time. So one thing that you need to be careful of when you rotate is like when you click on the axis, that you have to see that the circle in the color of the X appears. And then you can also see here, you see this is where I started, and then I can see an angle here on this imaginary circle. Yeah, for example, like this would be somewhat about 180 degrees. This would be somewhere around around 90 degrees. And so I rotate around here. But fortunately, I have my adjust last operation where I can actually set this to exactly 90 degrees if I need exactly 90 degrees. I can also set this to 60 degrees. Or 45. No, that didn't work. So this is extremely useful because sometimes if you need to rotate at a certain angle, especially if you need to change the orientation, you'll constantly be rotating for 90 degrees, and in this case it comes in really handy. So this was rotating along the red axis. Let me just show you how to rotate. This is rotating along the green axis, and this would be rotating. Oh no, wait. And this would be rotating along the blue axis. Okay, in this case, rotating along the blue axis is a little bit pointless because the cylinder will still be the same, at least similar. Okay, then you have, then you need to think about how to rotate. Like, so if you rotate, if you leave the pivot point here, so you have to imagine the pivot point is like a crane. Like on a construction site, you have a crane. So the crane stands in a certain position. And then an object that hangs on the arm of the crane is the more far away from the pivot point it will be, the more that will influence how the object rotates because it's rotating along the axis of the crane. So for example, now if I select this cylinder and I switch the pivot point to the 3D cursor, what will happen is that it will rotate along this axis. You can see now how the green, how the blue rotation tool appears in the position of the cursor. And another thing to be aware of is that it may also be affected by the cursor. So like, for example, if the cursor, because the cursor itself also has a rotation. So that's something that you will choose here. Okay, something else about this here is like you have, I'm not sure what is the difference between this and this. They pretty much override each other. I think it's better to just leave this at default and just use only this, or just leave this at default and use only this. But what they are doing is they are showing showing how you're moving in a certain direction. So if I take this object and I rotate it in a certain direction, at this point, the axis of this object deviates from the global orientation. So the global orientation is what we see here. The global orientation is what is defined by the axes which I can see in the grid. So if I select this object and I turn to moving, you see now this is like moving in a global. This is not moving along the object's own direction. So if I want to change this is when I have to change this. So I can switch to local. So this time, as you can see now, the arrows are aligned in the direction of the object. Or I can use the direction of the cursor, which is yet another one. And there are actually many different ones here. Yeah, the normal one is usually the same as the global, but it's not always the same thing. So the same thing here. So this is actually pretty much, I haven't figured out what's the difference between those two. But it's important to know which orientation you are using for scaling. Okay, and then another thing, Sometimes, actually, I already mentioned it briefly in the previous video. So another thing that you can do with the cursor and the rotations tool, and I will show also how this works with the scale tool, because the scale tool is especially useful. So you can rotate along this point. So if you need for some reason locate around the corner of this object, you just wait, now it's still rotating around the center because it's set to the bounding book center. But if I switch this to 3D cursor, you notice already how the position of the gizmo changes. And now I can rotate along. So now the cursor becomes the pivot point and I can rotate along this pivot point. This is super useful. Good. Let me see. Okay, now we can move on to actually move on to scaling. And there are actually two scaling tools. So there are two scaling tools. The regular scaling tool is what you see here. And if you right click on the document, so for all the tools, it's like if you have something here in the corner, that means you can right click on it and there are additional tools. And no, it's not right click. It's hold, mouse button and hold. Mouse button and hold, and then you can select another. There you have more tools around here. You see here you have annotate line, blah blah blah, and here you have different selections. So you hold the mouse button and you can get it. But let's first talk about the regular scale tool. So I will select some object. I will choose some object, and then the scaling gizmo appears. And as you can tell the difference between this one and others, because remember this one was arrows, this one was circles, and this one was like cubes at the end of the axes. And also I have a circle. So here the circle means to scale proportionally. Again, remember that this is dependent on the pivot point. So now the pivot point is outside of the object because it's in the position of the cursor. if I switch it to this one, then it will scale from the center of this object outward. And this is where the cursor becomes super useful, because if I switch to the orthographic view, if I switch to the orthographic view, then I can switch this on a corner and then scale away from this. No, wait. I need to switch it to the cursor. So I can scale away or towards this cursor. Okay, once again, I switch to the center. I switch to the center, and I can use these arms to scale along the axis only. So you see this? This scales along the blue axis only, this scales along the red axis only, and this scales along the green axis. Oh, wait. Something is wrong. This scales along the green axis only. And again, this is more useful if you make use of the 3D cursor. So you have this, you position the 3D cursor at a corner, and you can scale away or toward this corner. This is like super useful, and this is basically all you need to know about using the actual object. And I'm really give you this advice, like make good use of the 3D cursor. It's super useful to use it for this kind of scaling. Good. Then the other option that you have for scaling things is the scale cage. And if maybe you have worked with SketchUp before, then this would be very familiar to you. And here you can just, yeah. So this is like where the pain begins, right? So so here you can click. If you click on a, yeah. See, this is what I never know. How does it work? So again, this is affected by the position of the cursor. So you might want to get rid of the cursor. So again, if you select this edge, then you see how this is actually scaling proportionally, right? So if I want to scale non-proportionally, I have to select this position. I have to use this position in the center of the respective axis. So that's something that works well. But the scale cage gets rather confusing if you are rotated, because if you have the regular scale tool, you can just switch it to local, or you can leave it. Or normal. You can switch it to local, and then you can scale. You can still scale along that direction. Right? Let me see. You can still scale along the different axes, but for the scale cage, if you have the scale cage, actually you see that it does not work. It will scale the whole thing proportionally. So I think the scale cage has its uses. It's if you need to quickly change sizes, it's very useful. But if you want to accurately change sizes, it's better to use the regular scale tool, and then to use the regular scale tool along with the 3D cursor. And another thing that you can have is, like, you can add. Let me switch 3D cursor to another position. So here we have a mesh. We have a monkey. So this monkey is actually the mascot of Blender, and it's actually a she. So she, I forgot her name, but she is like a already created object with details that can be used for reference, that can be used to try out things quickly. And here you can see that, and you can have a try to scale her, because for her it's like it does different things. So this is like how it feels like to tweak some actual objects, like rotate her in some crazy direction, and then the scale gauge. So this is, you see, this is according to the normal, and this, but it cannot be switched to global. You see, so the scale gauge has certain limitations because it's tied to the orientation of the object, whereas the scale tool can be adjusted to, you see now it's in the global orientation, and now it can be switched to the local orientation. Good. Then another tool that you have is the transform tool. And as you can see by the gizmo, the transform tool is all the other three tools made into one tool. And I think that this is probably supposed to be like super efficient. I personally do not like to use it. You can see if you can get used to it to do things all together in one. Okay, another tool which is not super useful but which can come in handy now and then is the Annotate tool. And the Annotate tool is basically you just write something. You write something in here. But remember that, you know, this is in 3D space, so depending on how you move it, it may not be readable. So actually, I don't really see what's the use of this, but sometimes it might be useful. Annotate line is you hold the button, and yeah, I forgot how to use it. Oh, so you can draw lines with it. You can draw straight lines. So, but you see, it's not even that easy to use. Annotate polygon, annotate eraser. Annotate eraser is obvious what it does. It can help you to get rid of all your failed annotations. Good. Then another tool which you have is the measure tool. And the measure tool, it can measure distances. So if you have a cube, you can just look at the sizes given. But if you have a measure, you can use it to push the mouse button and hold, and then you can measure certain distances, like maybe how much is this cube across. And another thing I can do with the measure tool is I can click here in the center and use it to measure an angle. So this is actually something rather useful, that can be rather useful. I haven't figured out for what it is useful yet, but I think it may be rather useful. For example, let me think about it. So if you have rotated an object, no. If you have rotated, just like I have rotated this cube, right? So maybe I can go to the orthogonal view, and now I can use the measure tool to measure this angle. So how would I go about this? I would have to follow here, and I will measure this distance. I will have this, and then click in the center and move this about. So now I can figure out that, you know, this angle is, let me see, 38 degrees. So this is the angle tool and the measure tool. Good. Another thing that you can do, and this is something that is again very useful, especially if you want to have accurate models, is you can do, let me just get rid of all of this stuff. So I also got rid of the light source actually, and the annotations, I need to erase them. I cannot delete them. So if I want to make an accurate model, maybe I should position the cursor back in the origin. So if I want to make an accurate model, I might want to enter the values instead of just, you know, dragging mouse around. So for this I have a tray which is here in the corner. So here in the corner, well, actually it doesn't come out now, but this is now the active tool. You have another thing here which is about the view and about the paper. But what is useful here is this. So if I add a new object here, like add a cube. So I can always control the size here. You see here, this is the size in meters. So this is the absolute size. And there is another time where you have the absolute size here. And why is this important? Because if I use the scale tool, then the size will always be, I can use the scale tool to scale around. Yeah, you can scale here. But as you can see here, the scaling is always only it's relative, so it's not the absolute size. So the absolute size, to find out the absolute size of the object, I need to look here or here. And this is like, if you want to make things accurate, you must use this, and then you can enter the values here. You can also do any kind of transformations through here, actually, if you like that. For example, you can change the location here. You just move the location like this. And the advantage of this one is you can be very, very accurate. Like if you see, this is like a thousandths of a millimeter. Yeah, so you can move this by the thousandth of a millimeter. So it can be super accurate. You can move around the axes here. Yeah, you can also enter some value here. You can just say 6. Oh, and then it's like moving too far away. The same goes for the rotation. If I want to rotate exactly 90 degrees, actually, in some cases, it may be more quick to rotate like this. And not sure if this. Oh, so actually, you see, actually this. Let me see. Let me see if I rotate this by 45. So actually, as you can see, this will not be affected by the pivot point. So that's a disadvantage that you have in this case by scaling along this side. So, and then, but for the, and again here for the scale, you have the scale is again relative. You can make the log here to, scale only around. So this way, this one certain value will not be changed if you change them all. And here you can set up the actual dimensions. So if you, for example, if you're doing an aircraft, then you can define the size of this or any other thing. You just, to make sure that you get the measurements, that you get the scale correct, you use the size here to set up your reference image. And we will be getting to reference images. Good. Then the next thing that we need to talk about is the Bool tool. And the Bool tool is an object which is a function which you can get through the object menu. The object menu in object mode. And this is also one of the add-ons which I let you turn on in the first video. And this is a super useful tool. Because it can change two objects to become one object. Like that song by the Spice Girls, to become one. And if you don't know what a Boolean operation is, so if you look at this here, you have the difference. Like you can cut out the difference. You can have the intersection, or you can have a union of objects. So those are called Boolean objects. And if you have it in programming, this would be like and, or not. Yeah. So that means you add, subtract. It sounds really complicated, but it's actually very easy if you use it. If you start using it and you learn what does it actually do. And of course, you need to have two separate objects. And maybe it's, if you have a plane, you have the body and the wings. If you have buildings, you have different building sections. If you have an animal, you have bodies and the limbs. And you just make them as separate objects, and then you Bool tool them together, as I said in the beginning. And for example, let's have a cube and a cylinder. So I will add a cube, and I will move this a little bit away. and I will add a cylinder. So I have these two objects. And now I will move this cylinder to be you see they are now in the same position. Maybe make it a little bit smaller. So now you can see that this is like on the top of the cube. Looks a little bit like a Lego. Good. And now, as you can see, they are two separate objects. If I select them, they are two separate objects. Good. And if I use the Bool tool, I can use them to make them once. To make them to one. So if I use Bool tool difference, you see part of it will be cut away. Yeah, now this is strange because you don't really see anything. But it's like the lower part of the cylinder. If I switch to X-ray, you can see the lower part of the cylinder. So now I make the difference and the lower part will be gone. Okay, and it's important that you need to remember that the object which you choose last will be the one which remains. So if I want the cube to remain, I will select the cylinder first, then select the cube. And then I go to Bool tool and I make a difference. And now you can see that instead of cutting up the bottom of the cylinder, there is a circular hole cut into the cube. Good. Then the next one that you have is a union. So if you look at this, if you look at this, you can see that if you look at this, you see there are lines here inside, right? There is a roof here and there is a line here inside. So if or even better, if I look here inside, if I go to inside and I look here inside, I can see that, maybe it's a little bit difficult, but if I go inside, so I can see here that there is a cylinder here inside of this, right? So now I select these two objects. And as I said, the sum by the Spice Girls, tonight is the night when the two become one. So the two become one, and outside nothing really changes except that they become one object. But if I look here inside, you can see what happens. You see that now this additional cylinder and an additional roof, which was here inside, is now gone. Again, compare in the X-ray mode, so you see here, now there is nothing here, right? If I go back, you can see that there are two objects, but there are also much more lines. So this is the union. Then you have intersection. So for intersection is, again, you have two objects, right? And I select both of them, and this will delete everything except the place where these two parts intersect. So this is like this. So this is the intersection. Good. In this case, of course, it doesn't matter in which order you select them. And then another one is slice. Yeah. Where you will cut them up into different objects. So this is actually the opposite if you want from union. And the results here can be rather funny, because you would expect that this upper part will also remain, but actually it's just, it's cutting this out. It has cut it out, but it has left the inner part, right? So again, and this is again affected by in which order you select them. So if I select them in this order, then I slice it, and I get this cylinder cut into two parts, into two objects, but the cube disappears. So this is something where it can be very useful for cutting pieces in a certain way. It's very similar to what we will later have as with the knife tool, or with the let me see, what's the name of that tool? I forgot what's there is another tool for it which does something very similar. Good. So another thing that you need to understand is about the Bool tool. So you have 8 options here, right? You have 8 Bool options. You can totally ignore the lower ones because, as you can see here, auto Boolean is, I don't know why this would be called auto Boolean. It's a little bit confusing. But this one is for 3D objects, while the brush Booleans are not for 3D objects, so you can totally ignore them. So so there's actually another way of doing doing the intersection, which is if you choose this object, and then if you go into the edit mode, and there is a option to make an intersection here from the face menu with access, but they are very troublesome to use, so I'm not even going to show you how to use them because the Bool tool is just so much more convenient. Good. There are 3 things which are very important to remember when you work with the Bool tool. So this is important, okay? Important. So it's a very good idea, or actually I already mentioned it, to create a new version of your document before you use the Bool tool for major operators. If you have some small things and you just quickly need to get them together, it's not. But if you have different parts, like if you have the different parts of the different limbs and body of the animal, you have the wing and fuselage of the plane, or you have different building parts, and before you put them together for exporting, it's better to create a new document, save the document on a new name, and then make the Bool, so you can still have the original parts around. Another one reason why this is why this is also very important, because it's like maybe later, maybe in some cases you will have a part of a really big part cut away, yeah, but you may still need the shape which is under it, because, like for example, if you look at my animal models, you have let me show you. So here I have the rabbit model, and to give you an example of this, like here is the back leg, and this is the main body. So if I Bool tool these two, then there will be a big hole which will be cut into. There will be a huge hole cut into the body. You see this? So I will use the unify in the end, but it's still the same thing that will happen. But this section of the main body still needs to be built as a body, as a complete cone, as a complete cylinder or whatever. So this is then if I Bool tool this part away, make a hole here, then once I export to 2D, I don't know anymore how to build this section. So this is why I need to keep around. This is why I need to keep around the body as a whole body, because then I can, you know, create this, and then later in the 2D software I will put these two, the one which has the cutout part and the one which has the not cut out, where the part is not cut. I will put them on top of each other so I can see where this part will be glued in the end, but I can still have the full one, and that's really important. Yeah, and now we get to reference images, and so a typical way in which you would use reference images. Let me show you. So when you start with a model, you're going to need reference image. So whether it's a building where you will need maybe a floor plan and maybe a side view, or whether as you plane in a plane where you have 3 view, that's what I'm going to show you. Or even if you have an animal, it might be a good idea to create a 3 view. Like for the rabbit, if you can show you for the rabbit, or actually it's called a little bunny. But even for the little bunny, I have created my own 3 view, because this is much easier to as a reference than if you're just working freehand from an image. So I create the 3D view first, and then I bring this into Blender. So let me show you by the example of a plane. So for the plane, actually, it's a good idea to have the size of the object. So what I usually do is I usually set up the cube with a full size. Yeah. Actually, I'm going to have a separate video about this particular plane. So I'm just going to show you, because I don't need to look up the sizes now, but I will bring in an image. And here, if I go to reference image, so I can choose my top view, right? I can choose my top view, and normally if I load it, it will be placed in the origin and in this position. But what I actually need is this to, and as you can see here, if I click on this, and this is confusing. So if I click on this, the size here will not work. Yeah, I can scale it and do everything else as with any other object, but it does not display the size correctly. And you see, even here, it only displays a scale. And this is why I'm going to need a box as a reference for the size. So then I can set the size here. Let me just do some random size. Oh, wait, not here. So I can set the dimensions. You see, I have, let me see, go back. So I will just set the size of the box to the size that I need. So I have maybe, yeah, I forgot what is the actual size, but 12 meters maybe. So maybe the wingspan is 12 meters, right? So then I can move this into position, and and this is what always happens is that you accidentally scale it. But I can use the box as a reference for the size of the image. Good. And but you see now, if I want to bring in the side view, and I will choose a reference, and I will bring in the side view, and what happens is that this is placed again in the same position. You can see it's placed in the same position. So now this is perfectly fine, but I need to rotate it several times, and this is actually not necessary because there's a more clever way to do it. So delete this again. So because if I bring in the image, I have something called align to view, and if I bring in the side view and load, it will align it to the view. But of course now you can see the view is the strange view. So the image will be placed perpendicular to the view. So if the view is from here, then it's not useful. But it becomes useful if I switch to the orthographic view. So I switch to the orthographic view from the side, and actually the other side, and then I add in the object, and I add in the image, reference image, the side view. Click to align to view and load the reference image, and it will already be put in the right position. So now all I need to do is to move it and to scale it to the size that I need. You see? And then I will just repeat the same thing for the front view. I will switch to the orthographic view. I will include the reference and choose the front, and it will be put in a position, and then I can move this around and scale it to the desired size. And maybe you already noticed that I used here the yellow corners. So this is something specific about the light. Why it's not working? About the camera, at least about the light. But anyway, so if I move the cursor over the image, then I can click and move it freely. I can also move it along the axes by pushing the respective buttons, the respective keys. And another thing that I can do is I have these yellow boxes up here. And these yellow boxes are actually for scaling. So this is a quicker way of scaling. You can judge for yourself which is more useful to you. It's because I found that in the current version of Blender, which I've been using, it's like version 4, and on this particular computer, it's, you see, this is an older version. This is an older version. So here there is no problem to use the gizmo with the reference images, but in my version of Blender 4 on this computer it does not work. So that's why there is the other way of moving the images, which is click on the image, hold and move around, and then restrain along the axis if needed. Strain along the axis if needed by using the keys X, Y and Z. And as I said, to scale around the cube, the corners. Here it is a little box at the corner. If I do the same in Blender 4, there will be a big box on the side, but it's still the same. Okay, something more about the images. So you actually have a setting. You have settings for the image. And they are here in the bottom. So usually they are part of the properties, the properties window. And in the properties window, if you have an image, you can select this. You can select it also from the outliner, and you can have settings for the image. So for example, like this side view is now the side view without landing gears. And I can select this and I can exchange it to be the side view with landing gears. So I just exit here away and I open another one. And I go to here, I get the side view with landing gear. And I open the image and it has been exchanged. Actually the orientation is correct. So, so this is something that is useful. And another thing that I can do here is I can pack the image. That means it will become part of the file. There's not a lot to show you here. Let's just pack it and then it's packed. Another way to pack all images is here through the external data and pack all into Blend. The advantage of this is that if you need to pass on a file to someone else, or if you need to move it to another computer, then the images will be included in the document. But there's one thing that you should remember: this works only if you're running the same version of Blender. At least that's the experience I made, the experience I had. And but anyway, this is a super useful function, because otherwise you will have to, if you bring this to another version of Blender on another computer, or to Blender on another computer, whether it's your own computer or someone else's computer, you will have to set up all the reference images or load them in, just like load them in with this one. Load them in with this one and load them in again. So this is like super useful. And you have some more settings here for the image. You see here now empty. So empty now is actually empty because this is the name of the picture. So in the outliner, I can actually rename. It's a good idea to rename the images, because if you want to turn them off and turn them on, it's easier to find them. So this is the side view, right? So I can rename this to side view. And then if I select it here, yeah, I don't know why this does not. It's still named empty. Okay, because this is not the side view. So this is the side view, as you can see. So now this becomes side view and Oregon, and the name is shown here. And yeah, obviously it's still called empty here, but the thing is that displays images. This you don't need to change because you want it to display as an image. Then here you can adjust the size. So technically you could also, if you have the length of the plane, you could also adjust the length around here. Yeah, you can just adjust the length around here, and it will be, but you can only adjust the length. You cannot adjust anything else. Then offset here is the position. So you can change the position here. So that's like actually what you can do is you don't need to, you can just choose not to use the box as a reference. You can just set the main length here and then adjust the others accordingly. Another thing that you have is a depth. That means which thing will be seen. So for example, if I choose this, then you know, as you notice, this will it will show behind the other objects. Behind the object, behind the other, but it will be disappear in front of the objects. This is the same thing. So this one, it will be, yeah. Actually, you call this occluding. So this image occludes this image. So it means you don't see it, and this way, this one occludes the other image. I don't really see what this is useful for, but some people think it's useful. Another thing that you can do is like, because if you have, you see this side view is actually correct from both sides, right? So this side, but if I would have a different view on this side, maybe I can change the side. So if I say front, then I will only see the front of this, and if I see this from the back, it's not visible. See that? In the same way, I can switch this to back. It cannot be seen from the back, but it can be seen from the front. It cannot be seen from the front. It can be seen from the back. Good. And then another thing that you can do is like show, if you have, is this, you can say show in orthographic and perspective. So now we are in the perspective view, right? If I turn this off, this will disappear here. But then if I switch to orthographic view, which is the correct orthographic view, you see in the orthographic view it will appear. Once I rotate out of orthographic view, it will disappear again. Same thing for perspective, it's just the opposite. So in the perspective it is seen. If I switch to orthographic, it disappears. It can be useful if you just want to see your reference image when you switch to orthographic view. And then another thing that may or may not be useful, you decide yourself. I think it can be useful now and then, but then again, you can also use the X-ray setting for this, is opacity, and then here you can select, you can make the image semi-transparent. See that? Okay, this can also be useful, like if you want to edit something behind, then you can use this setting. Yeah. And now at the end, one more thing about adding in objects. So I actually forgot to mention this at the beginning, but it's really important. And you will see that in later tutorials. I didn't include it in the original written tutorial because I thought this is too basic. But if you add in a cylinder, maybe the amount of surfaces is too little. So in this case, you will raise the amount of vertices here to make it more round. And this is which in later tutorials you will be mentioning that. So that's something good to know. And this concludes our video about the edit mode, about the object mode. Good. Thank you for watching.